Hello everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Theologia Moralis of Alphonsus Liguori. This is the first article on scandal of 3. We're only going to be looking at 2 for this series, but there are 3 in total. Here's the table of contents. What kinds of sins are active and passive scandal? The resolution of many cases cited by Busembaum. When scandal is a special sin. Must the circumstances of its entrance necessarily be explained in confession? Whether it is lawful to ask at some time from someone that is prepared to sin to furnish something that he cannot do without sinning. Okay. First, scandal in general. Scandal is an occasion of sin for another. It's when you or someone else acts as an occasion of sin for another person. If you think an example of scandal would be a person curses in front of a child, that's a sin, but they've also been an example for the child. The child then goes on to curse later because he saw that example. That would be an example of scandal. There are 2 kinds of scandal. There's active and passive scandal. Active scandal is what is actually done. So this would be the adult that's cursing in front of the child. They act as an occasion of sin for the kid. So the adult sins and is the active scandaler. He's being scandalous. And then there's passive scandal, which is the person who receives the sin, the person who sins on account of the others. So the child that curses because he heard the adult curse is the passive recipient. He is scandalized by the adult. There is some stuff to note about active scandal. First, the action could be of any type. It could be a good action, a neutral action, or an evil action. You could scandalize someone by fornicating. Maybe a priest fornicates, someone finds out about it, and they are put off of Catholicism because the priest made the religion look disreputable. It could be a neutral action. I don't know, just take any neutral action. Maybe you're in a place where it's unusual for people to go outside without at least a t-shirt on, and you go out in a tank top and you scandalize people. Wearing a tank top isn't inherently evil, but if you wear a tank top in the wrong place, that could be scandalous to some people. And finally, you could even do a good thing with the intention of scandalizing someone. So, say, for example, you have Protestant parents and you go to church with some friends, and the Protestant parents start seeing Catholics as if they're trying to steal children from the parents or something as a result of you doing something good, which would be going to Mass. Going to Mass is a good thing, but if your parents are likely to have a significantly lower view of Catholicism, that could be a kind of scandal that's being committed. Okay. There are 2 kinds of active scandal. One is active scandal per se, and one is active scandal per accidens. So active scandal per se is when you intend the sin of another. The easiest example of this would just be a person who dresses in order to provoke lust from others. When you are trying to make people fall for you, that is a kind of scandal, and you're intending it, so it's per se. We'll talk a bit more about that later. Then per accidens scandal is when the scandal is not intended but known. This could be when you dress a certain way because you like compliments, and you know that it might make people lust, but you're not really interested in that. You're just interested in receiving compliments from people. So that would be scandal per accidens because the sin is not intended. It's just foreseen. Then in passive scandal, there is a division between given and received. Given scandal is essentially just, when you receive scandal, and it's like kind of reasonable. Like it's reasonable to be scandalized by a person who's wearing almost nothing in public. However, received scandal is scandal where it's unreasonable to expect someone to be scandalized. An example of this would be a person who loses an argument, and the person they lose to is like a very nice guy. He's not being mean about anything, and the guy who loses decides that he's going to hate the guy that won. The hatred of the winner in this case would be evil, and the winner provided an occasion for the scandal of the loser. However, it's not reasonable for the loser to start hating the winner just on account of like losing a single argument. That would be very unreasonable, and there's no culpability on the part of the winner in that case. Okay, so what are some consequences of the division? The first is that active scandal isn't required for passive scandal. Because there is this kind of received scandal where it's unreasonable, it's possible not to be actively scandalizing other people or doing something to scandalize others. People can just choose to be offended. You can be scandalized by anything if you try hard enough. The second is that passive scandal is not a special sin. So we're going to unpack this for a second. So a special sin is a sin of its own species. So it's a different kind of sin from the others. There are sexual sins, there are sins of gluttony, there are sins of pride, and each of these is a different species of sin. So what Alphonsus is saying here is that passive scandal, receiving scandal from another person, is not its own species. It's not its own kind of sin. It's not something which needs to be confessed. Active scandal is its own species, which we'll get to in a little bit. But passive scandal is not necessarily isn't its own species of sin. Next, sinning in the presence of others is not always an instance of scandal. That's only when there is like a likelihood that other people in the area will sin as a result. For example, if you start a fight, but no one else is going to join in, it's just you and the other guy, you're not acting as a participant in active scandal for the other people because they won't sin around you. Another case like this would be if you curse around your parents. If you have good parents, your parents are not going to start cursing as a result. Maybe your parents will, but if you know that they won't start cursing as a result, then you're not committing the sin of scandal. You're just being vulgar, which can be its own sin. And then all active scandal, directly intending the ruin of one's neighbor, is definitely a special sin. It is its own kind of sin, its own species, against charity, against the love of your neighbor. We will talk more about the special sins later, but actively intending someone else's sin is always a mortal sin. Cases resolved. Case 1. A man sins mortally that gives occasion for the sins of others, unless he fails to consider that his action would be an occasion of sin for others. If you give people if you present a good opportunity for them to commit a mortal sin, then you are committing a mortal sin just by giving that opportunity, at least without good reason. This is an interesting thing because often this can make what would normally be a venial sin into a mortal sin. A priest tells a bad joke that scandalizes those present. Bad jokes are usually only venial sins, but if it puts someone off of Catholicism, which could, damn them to hell, the priest actually commits a mortal sin of scandal. Because what would normally be a venial sin of simply telling a bad joke has become a mortal sin of scandalizing someone away from the faith. So because he became an occasion of sin for others, he sinned himself. Another example was a woman dresses in a certain way to feel pretty. Aquinas says that situations like this are generally venial. However, she knows that it is likely to be an occasion of sin for others, but does not intend it. So she knows that people will or are likely to lust after her depending on how she dresses, right? But she dresses in a certain way to feel pretty. The vanity here is only a venial sin. The vanity is the lesser sin present. But because she knows that it's likely to cause mortal sin in those around her, she also commits a mortal sin by being an occasion of sin for others. Case 2. A man that causes a venial sin is guilty of a venial sin. Basically the same. It's just if you are an occasion of sin for someone else, and you don't intend it, it's a peracidens case of scandal, then you only sin venially. The exception to this is when you intend for them to sin. So if you commit a venial sin and someone else commits a venial sin because of it, and you don't want them to commit the venial sin, the second person, that would simply be a venial sin. But if you want them, if you sin with the express intention of causing the other person to sin, that would definitely be a mortal sin against charity. And then we have 2 examples. A man makes fun of his wife in front of his kid, causing the child to sin venially in imitation. And then a man makes fun of his wife so that his kid will follow suit, which causes the child to sin venially, but the husband to sin mortally, because the husband intended the child to sin in that case. Cases 3 and 4. A man who commits scandal is guilty of the sin he induces, as well as the sin of scandal, and he should confess both. If you cause other people to lust, you are guilty for their lust, and for causing the scandal. So you have to confess both scandal and lust. Pretty self-explanatory. And then case 4, one does not commit scandal when sinning publicly, as long as it is in the presence of those who are either so good or so bad that they won't sin in any special way as a result of seeing you sin. So if you sin in public, but you're only around people that are unlikely to sin as a result, then you're you're not totally fine. You still committed a sin, but you're not guilty of the sin of scandal. So next we have a special sin. Sin is its own, this is its own species, its own kind of sin. So a special sin is just one that has its own species and requires confession. It's its own kind of thing, and you'll have to confess it. There are 3 opinions on when scandal is a special sin. Opinion 1. It is only a special sin when the sin of the other is intended. So this is the per se active scandal. So just per se active scandal is the only special sin here. So per se or peracidens active scandal would fall outside of special sin and would not need to be confessed. And then we have opinion 2. It agrees, but with a distinction, so it's going to say essentially the same thing, but it's going to carve the area up a little bit more specifically. So they'll say there are 3 ways of causing scandal. One of them is with formal and direct intention, and this is when you intend the other person to be scandalized for the intention of ruining their soul. You're trying to scandalize them just so they go to hell. Then there is direct but not formal intention. This would be when you intend the other person to be scandalized, but it's for some further good. So you're trying to scandalize them, but only so some good may result from it. And then finally, there's indirect and informal. This is when you do not intend that the other person be damned, and you do not intend that the other person commit a sin. And this opinion is going to say that only the first 2 cases here, where you intend the sin of another, are a special sin. But, however, Alphonsus is going to say that scandal is always a special sin, active scandal, that is, when you are being an occasion of sin for others. This is always a special sin, specifically when intending the ruin of the other. that is actually two special sins. When simply causing scandal, it is just a special sin. So Alphonsus says that scandal as a whole, so all three of these, are special sins. But if you intend the ruin, if you're trying to get someone to sin, that is a second special sin. So scandal is the first one, and attempting scandal, attempting to ruin someone's soul, is the second special sin. Then whether circumstances must be confessed, this is pretty simple. Circumstances can be omitted when they are easily inferred, otherwise they should be made explicit. So if you fornicate and you're, an occasion of sin for the person you're fornicating with, then, it's not a good thing. You need to confess that you fornicated and that you were an occasion of sin for the other person. But in general cases, the circumstances can be inferred. Now, if you end up fornicating in incredibly strange circumstances, or for incredibly strange reasons, maybe you're a hostage, I don't know, then in that case you would need to confess the circumstances, because they couldn't be easily inferred just from the sin that you committed. And then finally, we have a situation. Can you ask for a favor that requires others to sin if they already intend on sinning? So this would be a case of, say, asking a prostitute to fornicate with you. She already intends to fornicate with people. However, she also is being given an occasion of sin for you or from you. So you're saying, like, okay, here's a place for you to fornicate. So the question is, can you ask someone to do something that is evil if they already intend to do that evil? Because you're not adding anything, right? So Alphonsus is going to distinguish first. Is the object intrinsically evil or not? So maybe you want someone to fornicate, or maybe you want someone to do something else, and you just kind of know that they'll end up sinning if they do that other thing. But the other thing, the second object, is actually neutral. You know that they'll sin when they do it, but if the object itself is neutral, then it can be licit for you to allow them in that situation, because you're not intending that they do anything evil. They'll just be in a position where you're pretty sure they will commit an evil. But as long as you don't intend the evil, it's technically licit in some circumstances. So if it's intrinsically evil, it's never licit to ask the favor. If it is not intrinsically evil, then because the sin is accidental to what is intended, it's not something that you intend. Then if you have a good enough reason, you can allow them to be in a situation where they sin. This uses something called the doctrine of double effect, which says that you can't intend anything evil, but you can intend neutral or good things which might have an evil effect as long as there is a comparable good effect. So intending something evil is always a no-no, but intending something neutral with an evil effect can be a good thing. And that's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed.